Mason Caldwell stood at his living room window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass as Seattle's infamous November showers drummed against the roof of his lakeside home. The reflection that stared back at him was a man weathered by time. 42 years that had carved deep lines around eyes that had once sparkled with hope. His fingers absently traced the worn wood of the window frame, a house that had become both sanctuary and prison in the 13 years since the accident. The piano in the corner remained untouched, sheet music for Somewhere Over the Rainbow still open, as if waiting for hands that would never return. It was David's favorite song to play for their son. Mason closed his eyes, the memory washing over him. David's gentle voice singing to 5-year-old Benjamin as tiny fingers pressed clumsily at the keys. Then came the flash of headlights, screeching tires, the sound of metal against metal that haunted his dreams. 2 caskets, one large, one impossibly small. That's what the town remembered. What they didn't remember was how the neighbors' condolences dried up when they realized the roommate Mason mourned was actually his husband, or how the whispers followed him at the memorial service, that perhaps God had taken them as punishment for their lifestyle. The knock came just as the grandfather clock chimed 5, 3 gentle taps, barely audible above the rain. Mason hesitated, unaccustomed to visitors, especially on Thanksgiving when most people were gathered around tables with family. He opened the door to find a boy, perhaps 12 years old, soaked to the bone, with eyes that made Mason's heart stop. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said, rainwater dripping from his dark hair. "Could I please have some water? I got lost, walking back to Evergreen Home." The glass slipped from Mason's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Those eyes, the exact shade of cornflower blue that had once smiled up at him from a face he thought he'd never see again. The same gentle curve of the beat, the same slight dimple in the left cheek. "Sir, yeah, are you okay over here?" the boy asked, stepping back cautiously. Mason sank to his knees, years of grief crashing against the shores of impossible hope. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Noah," the boy replied. Noah Miller, Mason's maiden name before he'd taken David's surname. The world tilted on its axis, reality blurring at the edges. This wasn't just a child asking for water. This was the sound of the past returning after 13 long years of silence. If you've ever wondered whether fate works in mysterious ways or if lost souls can find their way home, stay with HeartStories. Sometimes the smallest moments, a knock, a question, a glass of water, can rewrite the ending to our saddest chapters. The grandfather clock in Mason's living room ticked steadily, marking time in a house where it had stood still for 13 years. Noah sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, his sneakers leaving small puddles on the hardwood floor. Mason couldn't stop staring, cataloging every familiar feature, the way Noah's eyebrows furrowed when he was thinking, the slight tilt of his head when listening, gestures that belonged to a ghost. "This is a nice house," Noah commented, eyes wandering to the grand piano by the bay window. His gaze lingered there, something like recognition flickering across his face. Mason followed his glance. "Do you play?" he asked, voice steadier than he felt. Noah shook his head. "I don't think so, but I've always wanted to learn." He hesitated, then added, "Sometimes I dream about playing, though. That's weird, right?" Mason's heart stuttered. "What kind of dreams?" The boy shrugged, embarrassed. "Just sitting at a piano with someone singing. A man's voice." His fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering phantom keys. "He always sings the same song." Mason stood slowly, trying to hide his trembling hands. "What song?" Noah hummed a few notes, the melody unmistakable, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the very song David sang to Benjamin every night before bed. Mason crossed to the piano, lifting the worn leather photo album from its top. Inside was the photo taken on Benjamin's 5th birthday, Mason and David flanking a grinning boy at this very piano, a rainbow cake with 5 candles glowing before him. "Noah, where did you grow up?" Mason asked, voice carefully neutral. "Nowhere, really. Foster care since I was little. They found me after a car accident. I don't remember anything before that. Noah's voice dropped. No one wanted me permanently. I've been at Evergreen Home for about a year now. Mason slid the photo album across the coffee table. Does anyone in this picture look familiar to you? Noah studied it, his fingers hesitating over David's smiling face. That's the man from my dreams. He looked up, confusion and something like fear in his eyes. How is that possible? The room seemed to contract around them, the air electric with possibility and terror. Mason sat beside Noah, careful not to touch him, afraid the boy might disappear like morning mist. I think, Mason said slowly, you might be my son, Benjamin. Noah stared at him, disbelief warring with a desperate hunger for belonging that Mason recognized too well. But they told me my family died. Everyone died in the accident. Mason nodded, tears threatening. They told me the same about you. Your father, David, didn't survive. But you, they never found your body. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Seattle skyline, nature punctuating the impossible revelation unfolding in the quiet living room. Noah's hand moved unconsciously to the piano, drawn to it like a compass to north. Could I? He started, then stopped. Unsure. Yes, Mason whispered. Please. Noah approached the piano cautiously, as one might a sleeping animal. He sat on the bench, placed his fingers on the keys, and without instruction, played the opening notes to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, hesitant but hauntingly familiar. Muscle memory preserved where conscious thought had been erased. Mason watched, understanding blooming in his chest like a winter flower, how the most profound connections aren't severed by time or tragedy, how the heart remembers what the mind forgets. Some bonds transcend even the deepest amnesia, calling us home when we don't even know we're lost. The Evergreen Children's Home stood like a fortress on the outskirts of Seattle, its red brick facade and iron gates more institutional than inviting. Mason gripped the steering wheel, watching rain streak down the windshield as Noah sat silent beside him. They had agreed to approach this methodically, return Noah to the home while Mason made official inquiries. Neither wanted to acknowledge the fear that once separated, they might never find each other again. Ms. Winters met them at the entrance, her steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes narrowing at Mason's expensive coat and luxury car. You're late, Noah, she said, not unkindly but with practiced detachment. Her gaze shifted to Mason, suspicion hardening her features. And you are? Mason extended his hand. Mason Caldwell. I found Noah lost in my neighborhood and offered him a ride back. Something in her expression changed when she heard his name. Caldwell, the architect. Her tone remained professional, but her grip on Noah's shoulder tightened imperceptibly. Thank you for your assistance. Mr. Caldwell? Noah, inside, please. Noah hesitated, looking back at Mason with a silent plea that tore at his heart. Miss Winters noticed the exchange, her lips pressing into a thin line. Actually, Mason said, I'd like to speak with you about Noah, if possible. The conversation in her cramped office was brief and chilling. Yes, she knew who Mason Caldwell was, the gay architect whose husband and son had died in that tragic accident years ago. No, she couldn't discuss Noah's history with a stranger, and absolutely not. She would not entertain visitation rights from someone with his lifestyle, regardless of resemblances or coincidences. Children need stability. Mr. Caldwell, traditional values, surely you understand. Mason understood perfectly. He had faced this particular wall before, built of prejudice masked as concern. He thanked her politely and left, but not before seeing Noah watching from an upstairs window, a small hand pressed against the glass. The next morning, news traveled quickly in the affluent lakeside community. Robert Simmons, who had never spoken more than 10 words to Mason in the decade they'd been neighbors, suddenly appeared at his door. Heard you're trying to adopt one of those orphans, he said without preamble. The gay one taking in strays. That's rich. Mason closed the door in his face, but the damage was spreading. By afternoon, his phone was ringing with calls from concerned neighbors and even clients questioning his sudden interest in a young boy. Sarah Chen arrived like a hurricane, her legal briefcase thumping on his kitchen counter. They'd been friends since college, before Mason met David, before she became one of Seattle's most formidable attorneys. "You should have called me immediately," she scolded, spreading documents across his granite island. "If this boy is Benjamin, we need DNA tests, court orders, and a strategy for dealing with the prejudice you're going to face." Mason sank into a chair. What if he isn't Benjamin? The question that haunted him. What if I'm seeing what I want to see? Sarah's expression softened. Then you'll know. But Mason, what if he is? What if your son has been in foster care all these years while you mourned an empty grave? That night, Mason stood outside Evergreen home, rain soaking through his jacket. He had no legal right to be there, but something stronger than law pulled him toward the building. In an upstairs window, a small lamp flickered on, and Noah appeared, staring out into the darkness. Their eyes met across the distance, two souls recognizing each other despite every barrier built to keep them apart. Mason raised his hand in a silent promise. Noah mirrored the gesture, a covenant between strangers who might be father and son, a bridge forming across 13 years of separation. The Seattle courtroom hummed with tension, austere and unyielding under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. Mason sat beside Sarah, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across the aisle, Winters conferred with Evergreen's attorney, occasionally glancing toward Mason with thinly veiled contempt. Judge Eleanor Ramirez studied the file before her, expression carefully neutral. "This is an unusual petition. Mr. Caldwell, you're requesting temporary guardianship of a child based on resemblance and piano playing." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the gallery. Mason felt his face flush but met the judge's gaze steadily. "Your Honor, I'm requesting permission for DNA testing to determine if Noah Miller is, in fact, my son, Benjamin Caldwell, believed deceased for 13 years. The Evergreen attorney rose. "Your Honor, this is clearly a case of a lonely man projecting his grief onto a vulnerable child." Caldwell's lifestyle choices also raised serious concerns about counseling. Judge Ramirez interrupted sharply. "We're discussing DNA testing, not lifestyle evaluation. Let's stay focused." Outside the courtroom, Robert Simmons had organized a small but vocal group of protesters. "Protect our children" read their hastily made signs, as if Mason were a predator rather than a father searching for his lost son. But standing quietly at the edges of the crowd were Jack and Miguel Rodriguez Peters, the couple who had moved in 3 houses down last year. They nodded to Mason in silent solidarity. The day test was conducted the following week, a simple cheek swab for both Mason and Noah, the samples sealed and sent to a laboratory. The waiting began, days stretching like taffy, time both crawling and rushing. Mason threw himself into work, designing buildings he couldn't focus on, while Sarah filed motions to expedite the results and gain temporary visitation rights. Surprisingly, Judge Ramirez granted supervised visits, 2 hours every Saturday at the Evergreen home, under Miss Winters' watchful eye. During these precious moments, Mason brought sheet music, teaching Noah the piano his hands seemed to remember better than his mind did. They played Somewhere Over the Rainbow together, Noah's fingers finding keys without instruction, muscle memory guiding him through melodies he shouldn't know. "I keep having these dreams," Noah confessed during their 3rd visit. "About the accident, there's water and glass and someone pulling me out, a woman I didn't know." Mason's breath caught. The accident had happened on the floating bridge across Lake Washington. Benjamin's car seat had been ejected into the water. The official report stated he'd drowned, body likely carried away by currents. But what if someone had pulled him out? What if, in the chaos, a child with no identification had been taken to a hospital, then placed in the system when no one claimed him on their 5th visit? Noah asked the question Mason had been dreading. "If I am Benjamin, does it bother you that my foster family sent me back because I might be like you?" Mason's hand stilled on the piano keys. Like me, Noah stared at the floor. Gay, or maybe gay, I don't know yet, but they always seemed to think so. The pain in those words, the rejection that had followed this child through home after home, tore at Mason's heart. He chose his words carefully, aware of Winter hovering nearby. Noah, listen to me. Who you are, who you might become, is perfect. David and I only ever wanted Benjamin to be himself, completely and without fear. His voice dropped to a whisper. And if you are my son, that hasn't changed. The community meeting at the Lakeside Park Pavilion was Mason's idea. Rather than hide from the rumors, he would face them directly. Robert Simmons stood at the microphone first, his rhetoric about traditional families and proper influences growing increasingly heated. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jack Rodriguez Peters stepped forward. My husband and I have lived here almost a year, he said quietly. Most of you have welcomed us. Some haven't. But Mason Caldwell was the first person to bring us a housewarming gift and mean it. The first to defend us when someone vandalized our mailbox. Is that the action of someone we should fear, or someone we should support when he might have found his lost child? The room fell silent. Miguel joined his husband, their presence a reminder that families come in many forms. Slowly, others stood. Neighbors who had kept their distance from Mason for years, but now saw him through new eyes. Not as the grieving gay widower to be pitied or avoided, but as a father fighting for his son. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Sarah's voice trembled over the phone. Mason, the results are in. You need to come to my office right now. Lightning split the Seattle sky as Mason drove frantically through streets slick with rain. Noah had disappeared from Evergreen Home hours ago, vanishing after a younger child taunted him about wanting a gay dad. The police were searching, but Mason knew in his bones where his son had gone. The floating bridge stretched across Lake Washington like a concrete serpent, the same bridge where David's car had plunged into icy waters 13 years ago. Mason parked haphazardly at the viewpoint, rain pelting his face as he ran to the railing. There, hunched against the storm, sat Noah, soaked to the skin, eyes fixed on the churning water below. I remember it, Noah whispered as Mason approached. The crash, the water filling the car, someone pulling me out, a woman fishing nearby. She took me to shore, but then she left to get help and never came back. He looked up, rain mingling with tears. I waited and waited. I thought you'd come for me. Mason knelt beside him, heartbreaking. I would have moved heaven and earth to find you if I'd known you were alive. We had a funeral. Benjamin, I buried an empty casket because they told me you were gone. Noah's breath hitched. You called me Benjamin, because that's who you are. Aiden pulled the lab results from his jacket, protected in a plastic sleeve. The DNA test confirmed it yesterday. You're my son. For a moment, the world paused, rain suspended, traffic noise fading. Even the thunder seemed to hold its breath. Then Noah launched himself into Mason's arms, 13 years of separation collapsing in an instant. They clung to each other, father and son reunited on the very spot that had torn them apart. The courthouse was packed for the formal reunion ceremony. Judge Ramirez smiled genuinely for the first time as she signed the papers restoring Benjamin Noah Caldwell to his father's custody. Ms. Winters sat in the back row, her expression softer than Mason had ever seen it. Mr. Caldwell, she said afterward, extending her hand, I was wrong about you, about many things. I've started a program at Evergreen for LGBT youth in foster care, children who need homes with people who understand their struggles. I hope you might consider advising us. 6 months later, Mason and Benjamin hosted a charity concert for Evergreen's new program. Benjamin's fingers danced confidently across the piano keys now, playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, while Mason sang, the song that had kept them connected across 13 years of separation. In the audience sat Jack and Miguel, Sarah Chen, even Robert Simmons, who had gradually become an unexpected ally. As the last notes faded, Benjamin smiled at his father. Dad, I've been thinking about the spare room. What if, what if we offered it to someone from Evergreen? Someone who needs a family like ours. 1 year to the day after that fateful knock, Mason and Benjamin welcomed 15-year-old Tyler into their home, a boy whose parents had rejected him for being gay, who had bounced between foster homes before landing at Evergreen. Their family grew not by blood, but by choice, by understanding, by the recognition that love creates its own kind of belonging. Have you ever lost something precious only to find it transformed the moment it returned to you? Share your story of unexpected reunions in the comments below. And subscribe to Heart Stories, where we believe that sometimes the families we build are more powerful than the ones we're born into, because they're shaped by choice, by struggle, and by love that perseveres through even the darkest storms.